Hi guys, Daniel here, just recording a video for the topic of the week for this week, which is all about whether we use the secondary market and what our opinions are on collecting an out of print or out of production army. And this all comes in the wake of the Tomb Kings and various other fantasy models or lines being discontinued. So on the first point, yes, I do use the secondary market, and I probably wouldn't be in the hobby if I couldn't. Being in Australia, the prices retail are a lot worse than overseas. So that being one point, as well as having a reasonably tight hobby budget, means that the secondary market was really a necessity for me, at least. This is mostly eBay or the occasional bits selling website, because one thing I did find was that it was often not just buying a second-hand kit, but if you could buy the new bits to make whichever option of most of the dual kits you wanted, could end up being just as cheap or even cheaper than buying just a straight up second-hand model. And then you also get the advantage of having it unbuilt, so you can play and customize it however you want, a bit easier. Down here, in Australia, we don't have as many of the options for secondary markets that I think people in the US in particular have. I don't think there's a Craigslist for here, and Bartertown I think is the next most popular version, and that's based in America, I presume, or at least most of the people on there are from that part of the world. So yeah, for us it's really international bits sites or eBay, or we do have one or two forums similar to a Bartertown type thing, and I have used them in the past. It's a bit hit and miss what you get, and obviously smaller gaming population, is a lot less choice. But yeah, so I do use the secondary market, and it's been pretty critical to me continuing in the hobby. I'm in a better budgeting position than I am right now than I was when I started, so it's not as important now, but still use it whenever you can. I do like to try and support the local hobby shop as much as I can, but sometimes the wallet speaks a bit more than the heart, I suppose you'd say. The next part of it is about collecting out of print armies, and I do like to, well, I wouldn't say collect out of print armies, but there are certain things I do like that are out of print more than the current ones. I think, for instance, some of the older Lisbon models have a bit more character to them, or a bit more uniqueness, you might say. One example is the salamanders. I prefer the old sort of hulking sail-backed salamander to the current one, which is kind of, I don't know, it's a bit plainer. It's just a bit like a scaly dog almost. You could paint it brown and it might look like a hound. So on those sorts of things, I do like out of print models, and I do mix older models with newer ones. I do try and stick most of the time to a single edition or single run of models. So my Lizardman army is almost exclusively 5th edition, apart from obviously the models that didn't exist around then, like the Bastillodon and the Carnosaur. But they mesh in pretty well, so it's all right. On my Lizardman army, I have the old Slann, which is a picture that I've shown a few times. I've also got the older Skinks. I like the look of the older Skinks a bit better. Not to say I don't like the newer ones, I do. But I like the almost Amazonian jungle feel of them. They're a bit more lizard man-ish in that, with the bows and things like that, and more decoration and garments on them. I also prefer the older Croxigore. I think they look a bit less goofy, although I don't mind the newer ones actually. And then I mentioned the older Salamanders, and I've also got an older Stegodon. I find the newer one in that example is a bit too cartoonish for me, but I think they got the balance right with the newer dinosaur monsters. Straying from that into a general principle, I guess, I would only collect out of print models if I thought they were better, and I think most of the time the newer models are better. One example where I don't is that I think the older dwarf models had a bit more character to them. They were a bit more. They had a bit more of the Snow White dwarf about them. More fabrics and more personality on individual models. I don't know if this is a consequence of using the CAD sculpting system that they are now, but I find the newer ones they're too generic dwarf. They're just, your Tolkien covered in armor dwarves, and you could paint them and a bit differently, and they could really be either chaos or regular dwarves. I don't know if there's that personality to them, which I do think the older ones had. Some other models I think are much better in the old range. The Executioners, the Dark Elf Executioners, I think the new ones just look a bit weird, and the old ones where they were posed to with the sword above their head about to strike, they are a bit monoposed, but I think they are much nicer models. And I won't go through a million examples, but that's just the way I see it. But like I mentioned, I do think most of the newer models they're generally better, but there are some that where the older ones I think have more character, or just plain look better. And I would have some tips I suppose I might give to people who are considering collecting an out-of-print army or an out-of-print model army. And that would be, if you can, or I suppose it's all personal preference, but the best models or armies to collect from older editions would be ones that still have a current iteration. So the Lizardmen, for example, the older Skinks and older Saurus, they go for nothing just because there's a current version of them. So probably 90% or 95% of people looking on the secondary markets will gravitate towards the newer model range, whether they be because they think they're better or because they're newer into hobby and just want to get in at the current level. So from a pricing point of view, if you can choose a current army that just has older models, that would definitely be one tip. I might leave it there. I don't know if I've rambled a bit. I've jumped around a bit between a few different micro topics within the one bigger topic, but I hope it all makes sense, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers.